A lot of Northlanders are facing financial hardship, but not all of them qualify for state or federal help.
Enter one of the world's largest nonprofits. Their new study is shedding light on the help folks in our area need.
And Northern News Now's Jeffrey McClure takes a look at the problems being shown to Minnesota lawmakers.
ALICE, or Asset Limited, Income Constrained Employed, is a new United Way study focused on people struggling financially.
And what that really means to a lot of people more is the working poor, people that are working, trying to make ends meet, but still can't make enough money to pay for just basic needs.
The report was unveiled in the state's capital on Tuesday and revealed that even though minimum wage has increased in recent years, the number of households living paycheck to paycheck increased to more than 830,000 in 2022. Of them, more than 600,000 are considered to be above the poverty line.
That's the tough thing about ALICE, is people that are ALICE, they're above that poverty line, so they don't always get access to a lot of those resources.
According to the report, in 2022, 26% of Minnesotans fell into the ALICE threshold, but many Northland counties are seeing a higher ALICE population than the state average. Katie Hagland of Union Gospel Mission says rising food costs are partly to blame.
We've seen a lot of new faces in the last couple years, and those are folks that are coming to us and do have a roof over their head, but are still experiencing challenges with trying to make ends meet.
The Union Gospel Mission alone provided 15,000 more meals to the community than the year before.
It's a challenge not just with adults that have to go to work all day, but also the kids that have to go to school or stay home and be hungry all day as well.
The ALICE report was presented to state lawmakers Tuesday in the Capitol in hopes of getting the problem addressed. In Duluth, Jeffrey McClure, Northern News Now.
And while Minnesota lawmakers are still poring over that data, the ALICE report has been used in other states to address needs in transportation, child care accessibility, medical expenses, and more. You can find the full study at northernnewsnow.com.